Chapter 1.19 Harvest. Moving at a decent gallop, and not being slowed by Fidget being distracted and playful, it did not take long for them to reach Hawthorne. The tall walls came into view over the hill ahead, and Twitch pulled back on Fidget's fur, bringing them all to a skidding halt. She let out a gasp as Magnus's eyes narrowed. The walls of the town were covered in thick blankets of webbing that sparkled in the moonlight. They saw no movement, but it was clear that the town had been overrun. The front gates were wide open, but they hadn't encountered anyone on the road that may have fled. Twitch finally broke the silence. "We have to go in, don't we?" "Mm-hmm," Magnus quietly confirmed, still unable to form his words. "Survivors?" "Maybe." Magnus pulled his blunderbuss around in front of him, scooting back further on Fidget so he had room between himself and Twitch to maneuver. "Do you think it's a trap?" she asked. "Probably," he said, cocking back the hammer on his firearm and taking a deep breath to steel himself against his fear. "Let's go." Twitch gently urged Fidget forward, and slowly he started, one single step at a time, all eyes watching everywhere for any threat of danger. As they entered through the open gates, Twitch carefully let go of Fidget with one paw, reaching into the satchel to retrieve the orb. It ignited in blue flame, which reflected and glistened off thousands of strands of webbing stretched all around them. They still didn't see or hear any movement. What they did see, however, made their blood run cold. All along the street, plastered to every building and hanging from the eaves above them, were dozens of large, messy cocoons. No one could have survived this, Twitch thought to herself as they ventured further into town, the clusters of victims growing more dense, with open doors and broken glass everywhere. Twitch guided Fidget down the street as Magnus watched the roof lines above them for any surprise ambushes. As they rounded a corner, they interrupted a widow in the process of wrapping what may have been one of the town's last victims. Twitch was first to react, firing off a bolt directly at it. The bolt didn't hit its body, but it did shear off a leg. The widow screeched in pain as it dropped its prey and scurried up the wall. "Shit," grunted Magnus, as he and Twitch both jumped down off Fidget. Magnus lifted his firearm to his shoulder and quickly scanned for any attention they may have drawn. Twitch left the orb to float on its own as she ran up to the cocoon on the ground, frantically clawing at the webbing to pull apart a space for the victim to breathe. A young human girl, not quite a child, but far too young to have lived any meaningful life yet, gasped shallowly for breath as the black venom crept through the veins of her face. "Help me," she could barely whisper as the paralytic continued to slow her lungs, her eyes beginning to cloud. Knowing that there was no cure for the widow's venom, Twitch maintained eye contact with her as she reached into her satchel, producing the only help she could offer. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, choking on the words as tears welled up in her eyes. A final gasp of pain, and the life faded from the girl's eyes, as Twitch firmly pushed the knife into the girl's heart, letting out a sob as she prayed for Spirit to forgive her act of mercy. The air gradually became filled with the sound of scurrying, coming in from all directions. "We have to go," Magnus said forcefully. "Now." Twitch's sorrow quickly ignited into hatred for the widows as she tightly gripped the knife, purple sparks beginning to arc from her nails. Her lips curled as she slowly rose to her feet, the binding chain now fused to the knife still in the girl's chest. A widow came over the roofline above them, and with a quick yank and a flick, the knife sailed through the air, plunging directly between the widow's eyes as it fell from the wall with a heavy thud. Behind them, another widow came around the corner, and Magnus raised his blunderbuss, pulling the trigger. "Shit!" he exclaimed as the firearm failed. He barely had enough time to flip the rifle around, swinging the heavy stock and knocking the widow forcefully against a building. Twitch spun around, and with another yank, brought the knife and chain down heavy on the stunned beast, splitting its body open. As more widows continued to swarm in over the buildings and through the street, it became clear they would have to move, or they'd be quickly overrun. Magnus climbed back up onto Fidget as Twitch continued whipping the knife through the air, the combined blade and chain slicing off limbs and driving them back. "Let's go!" Magnus yelled, reaching down and extending his paw to lift her up. Twitch let the chain vanish, and the knife clattered onto the cobblestones as she grabbed his arm, letting him hoist her up. The orb was still floating nearby, and with her free paw she reached out, summoning it to her grasp. "You steer!" she yelled, pushing him forward, forcing him to lay down on top of Fidget's head. They took off down the street as Twitch sent bolt after bolt of energy ahead of them, clearing the path. Rounding another corner, they could see the sign of the Gilded Goblet up ahead at the end of the street. "We have to reach the portal," Twitch yelled as she continued blasting the nearest widows. Fidget was running hard and fast directly towards the building, and Twitch quickly lay down on top of Magnus to brace herself as Fidget leapt forward, carrying them through the amber glass window. They landed hard inside the dining room, all three of them tumbling through the tables and broken glass. Magnus and Twitch got to their feet, dazed, as Fidget scrambled to right himself. The widows were trying to clamber in behind them. The shards of glass around the frame slowed them down some as it nicked their flesh, but they soon began making their way in. "Get to the kitchen!" Twitch yelled over the loud screeching as she continued to fling bolt after bolt. "The basement door frame!" Magnus was first into the kitchen, followed by Fidget, as Twitch defended them, holding off the attackers. She had to dive over the bar to escape the piercing strike of a nearby widow. The move was not graceful, and she slammed into the shelves, almost dropping the orb as steins and bottles rained down around her. Recovering from the tumble, she saw next to her on the floor was the letter that she had delivered. Thinking quickly, she snatched it tightly with her free hand, crumpling it into her robe as she stumbled the remaining distance to the kitchen, turning to fire another bolt. Magnus had activated the portal, and the pink film materialized just as Twitch passed the threshold to the kitchen, the widows fighting to squeeze through the doorframe. Magnus reached out and grabbed Twitch by the robes, pulling her back and pushing her through the portal before turning his attention to Fidget. "Go on!" he yelled as he ushered and shoved Fidget through. It was a tight squeeze, and Magnus stumbled through the portal immediately after. The security mages on the other side immediately had their golden staves drawn, and Twitch cried out for them to stop shooting. Fidget quickly scrambled to dodge the golden bolts of energy that left burn marks on the stones where they hit. "Shut the gate!" Magnus yelled, as the long, sleek legs of a widow emerged through the portal. The legs flailed and tried to grasp the arch as the spider started pulling itself through the narrow doorframe on the other side. "I can't!" yelled the gatekeeper, repeatedly pressing the button at a station. The energy to the gate pulsed, and the portal flickered slightly but stayed open. Magnus quickly moved to the side of the gate where the energy conduit was connected to the stone arch. He gripped it tightly with both paws, propped the boot up on the frame, and pulled with all his weight. There was a crack, a sizzle, and the gate exploded in a blinding flash of light, slicing the widow's legs off and knocking everyone in the room to the ground. Twitch's ears rang and her head spun as she struggled to bring herself up on her elbow, looking around for Fidget. He was recovering himself on the other side of the chamber and appeared okay, but for how long, Twitch couldn't be certain. The security mages were scrambling for their staves, and she feared they wouldn't hesitate to shoot him. "Stop!" she yelled, the adrenaline surging again as she got to her feet, stumbling over to protect Fidget. The guards were now standing, staves in hand, pointed directly at Twitch, her hands outstretched as she pleaded for them to hold their fire. They stood their ground in defensive stance, but thankfully restrained their fire. Twitch breathed heavy and fast as she looked around for Magnus, seeing him lying on the ground next to the smoldering stone rubble of the destroyed gate, smoke wafting up from his singed fur. "Magnus!" she cried out, fighting back the urge to run to him, for fear of being separated again from Fidget. "Medic!" the gatekeeper yelled down the hallway leading out of the chamber. Twitch watched as two Coonkin in medical robes came running in, lifting Magnus up onto a floating stretcher. She struggled to hear or see any sign of life from him as the medics quickly rushed him through the transport portal to the medical wing. "Everyone in Hawthorne is dead," Twitch managed to say, turning to the security mages. She struggled to catch her breath as she slowly reached into her robes, retrieving the crumpled piece of parchment and holding it out to them. "Get me the librarian." This is the end of Book 1. We will return to Twitch and Fidget's story in time, but often, before we can move forward, we need to go back. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. I really do hope you're enjoying this adventure so far. The next book in the series is called Caven and the Golden Gears, and it follows Caven on his journey to rescue his kidnapped sister, starting with his capture on the streets of Hawthorne. We'll get to experience his first impressions of Fidget and Twitch, how he manages to sneak away in the night, and his encounter with the widows of Grimshade Forest. We'll learn more about the poachers and the dynamics of the conflict between the humans and the Coonkin, how he came to be in possession of the magical gears, and everything else that he's been doing this entire time. We will also return to the Academy briefly and learn what the librarian can reveal about the letter, Cornelius, and the darkness that plagues Ardenmist. Again, this entire series is published and available on Amazon Kindle and Kindle Unlimited, as well as individual paperbacks and the anthology version. You can help support me by purchasing or downloading your own copies, leaving reviews on Amazon or Goodreads, recommending this series to your friends, following me on Facebook, and even asking your local library to get copies for everyone to enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel here so that you don't miss any future episodes that I post. And until next time, happy reading and blessed be.